Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the HumAIn podcast, your tech insider podcast on the data economy. From the physical circuit chips on your smartphone to the software powering GPT models, we live in a data-first world. HumAIn interviews the founders, investors, executives, and tech leaders that are creating the world that we live in for consumers and enterprises. Welcome back, listeners. Introducing HumAIn, the tech insider podcast on the data economy. From the physical circuit chips on your smartphone to the software powering GPT models, we live in a data world. HumAIn interviews the founders, investors, and executives and leaders that are creating the world that we live in for consumers and enterprise. For this week's recording, we're featuring the co-founder and CEO of ESG Flow, Patrick Obeid. Patrick is building at the cross-section of ESG, how you can make smarter, faster applications that are compliant with policies and building for the new normal, which is a world that must take into account accountability, auditability, and traceability with systems. Patrick, thanks so much for joining us on the show.
Dave, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here. Thanks for hosting me.
It's great to host you. And I know we first met back in fall 2023 outside of the AI Summit conference in New York City. We were talking a lot about the future of data and AI. And at that point, you were, kicking tires on building out your new venture. Before we dive deep into what you've built, love to share with the listeners a little bit about your journey, which led you to ESG Flow.
I was actually a consultant working at Bain and Company at the time. I had spent the last decade working in management consulting, specifically working on sustainability and energy efficiency topics. A lot of my work was advising public businesses and governments on how to set and comply with energy efficiency regulations. At that point in time, Bain had just rebranded a founder studio, which is a venture studio within Bain and Company. And I saw that the first venture that they wanted to incubate was an ESG venture. And that's a topic that is dear and close to my heart. I decided to quickly raise my hand and jump in and start building it. And we actually were able to spin out, and we became the first startup that was spun out from Bain and Company. To this date, we're still the first and the only startup, and many more to come, hopefully, after we were able to build the playbook. The reason I decided to do that is, again, I've always wanted to work on a mission driven startup. I have a lot of subject matter expertise when it comes to the environment, social, and governance topics during my last decade advising clients on those topics. And I just felt it was the right point in time to take that leap of faith and become an entrepreneur, which is something I've always wanted to do since my early 20s. And today, the startup that I built in the last year and a half is called ESG Flow, which I'm excited to talk to you about today.
I love that story. And it sounds like, building through Bain and Company, you were almost in the beginning what one call like an entrepreneur. You were building in-house in this like venture studio type of model. Maybe share with listeners about your experience going from like entrepreneur to now entrepreneur.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been exactly a year. In late March, early April 2023 is when I became an entrepreneur and I left Bain and I was the first employee of ESG Flow. And then since then, we've grown really, really fast. I think we're around 30 people today, which is super exciting to see. The transition wasn't easy. I think, being an advisor is extremely different than being an operator. As an advisor, I'm used to living in a more structured environment, knowing exactly what needs to be done like 3 weeks ahead. I think being an entrepreneur is exactly the opposite of that. It's being comfortable with the unstructured environment. It's being learning how to be agile, having skin in the game, and making decisions in a lot faster. So velocity of decision making suddenly became really, really important for me. It took me a while to adjust. That mindset shift didn't happen overnight. I'm still learning as we go, but it's a very different world. And I'm very grateful that I'm able to go through it. I'm also grateful for the last 10 years. I learned a lot about strategy and critical thinking, which allowed me to make more informed decisions today. And in the last 12 months, it was a very steep learning curve, and I was able to learn how to become an operator and make sure that, to make decisions and make them quickly and not get stuck on decision making. I think one of the frameworks that I developed in the last years, whether a decision is reversible or not, and if it's an irreversible decision, It's important to take my time. It's important to involve others in the decision making. But if a decision is reversible, and sometimes I have to use data to drive that decision, but sometimes I have to use my gut feeling and pattern recognition to just go all in, because things have to move really fast as an entrepreneur.
It's so fascinating, Patrick, talking about the transition from advisor to operator. One could go so far to see that today in the tech industry, right? There's a lot of focus around strategy and innovation, and you have these advisory networks, these deep bench of experts. So if I'm hearing you correct, that at Bain and Co, you were an advisor for, let's say, a portfolio of sustainability clients and almost like a ninja team. You go in here and there and you're supporting different companies in their ideation, build, and scale phases. And there may have been this aha moment that you and your colleagues were suggesting that could we turn these advisory services into some sort of product? Would that perhaps be some of the driver that led towards founding and creating ESG Flow?
That's exactly right, Dave. And I think I'm going to walk you through the first few months of me building this company. I actually, given that I built this within Bain and Company, I had the luxury to be able to work directly with some of the clients of Bain and Company. And many of those were, publicly traded companies. Some were Fortune 500 companies. And I was able to take my time and spend around 60 days interviewing around 100 executives in the space, and it was really fascinating. Those 100 hours, I think, were able to drive my vision for the company. I always say coming up with a vision is not something that happens overnight. Like, I know the way people visualize a vision is like a light bulb moment, but in fact, I'm a deep believer that coming up with a vision requires a lot of critical thinking, a lot of research, a lot of active listening. And I had the luxury to do that with the best and brightest people in the early days. And I think some of the biggest insights from those discovery calls that I did early on with some potential customers were that in a nascent space such as ours, it takes many, many hours and many, many calls to really hone in on the right idea. I think it's a very fast moving space, the world of ESG or non financial data or responsible decision making, whatever you want to call it. It was an extremely nascent space. It was moving really fast. There's a lot of noise, and many customers didn't really know what they needed. So it took really a lot of active listening, a lot of early conversations, a lot of, multiple scoping out of projects before I was able to kind of hone in on the right idea. I could probably pinpoint to October 2022, which is when I found what I call idea market fit, which is finding a gap in the market, knowing exactly how data and AI will allow me to solve it, and how I can build a scalable, modular, and flexible system that can hopefully help me solve this for thousands and thousands of enterprises in the future. And that idea was simple. In today's world, there is no data infrastructure for non financial data. Most enterprises have 1,000 plus metrics that they need to keep track of, and they have no central system to centralize that data. And to add to the complexity of that, data sits everywhere. Data is very unstructured, it's very raw, it's very inaccurate, it's very incomplete, and there is no technology today that can help companies get that data extracted, parsed, normalized, standardized, and processed into what I call audit ready metrics. What does that mean? It means that we're building the new finance. We're building an infrastructure for metrics that previously were never surfaced. Examples is tons of greenhouse gas emissions emitted per site where you're producing specific products, or it could be tons of greenhouse gas emissions associated with the purchase of a specific SKU. It could be the water consumed, the waste consumed, it could be the river pollution, the air pollution, health and safety data in your sites, recruitment policies, whistleblower policies. All of these data points are sitting in different systems. And in today's world, most companies, even the biggest companies, even banks like Wells Fargo, are still managing that data in Excel. And that's just not going to scale. And most of that data is inaccurate because it's been handled manually by humans. I'm a deep believer, and we're very lucky to live in the world we live in today, because you can really unleash the power of AI to help you extract the data, again, parse it, normalize it, standardize it, and process it all in a split second and then get you a metric that is auditable, traceable, that can help you make more responsible decision making and hold your enterprise more accountable. And I decided that was my idea and I was going to pursue it. A few more decisions that I had to make were, okay, where do I play? I also made the decision early on to focus on a sector. So I wanted to focus on the heavy industries, which is a sector that needs the most help and where you could drive the most impact in the coming years. So our focus has been on manufacturing, construction, and real estate, which I call heavy industries. Another big bet that I had to make early on was the hyper focus on auditability. When I was starting this business a year and a half ago, I would do 100 demos and 99 would ask me, why do I need this? Even in today's world, half of the demos that I do, most of the people that I'm demoing this to don't understand the importance and the urgency of what I'm doing. We are living in a world, or we will live in a world. I think in this country we're a bit behind vis-a-vis Europe, but in Europe it's extremely common now for companies to keep a track of all these sources of documents of data and be able to have an infrastructure to be able to extract it and centralize in one place, all referring back to that source document. I think in this country, the biggest businesses now understand the value of this. And we're going to start seeing a revolution in the smaller businesses that need that data to be able to survive. If you are a supplier of wood or steel to a $2 or $3 billion furniture manufacturing company, you're going to need to provide that data. If you're selling through Home Depot, if you're selling through Amazon, Wayfair, Target, you're going to need to provide that data if you want to stay in. But if you're selling to Coca-Cola, you need that data. And in today's world, having that data in a verifiable, auditable way is a very important factor to be able to survive and retain your market share in the coming years.
It was very clear, right, that you were interviewing and talking to these 60 plus executives. You were hearing the common thread about this problem on verifiability and auditability and being able to see that entire workflow for ESG data end to end. And so this could have been some of that precipice on launching and building the early prototypes of your product. But I want to take a step back, right? ESG has been around since like forever, before either you or I were born, but it's gone through waves and flows, especially as you mentioned, Patrick, in the States. We've been historically slower to adopt these ESG practices, while vis a vis Europe and Paris Accords and other institutions in Europe have been a lot faster. So, do you think, like, are we at an inflection point? Like, why now? Is now the time? Of course, we got greenhouse gases going through the roof, and earthquakes in New York City and tsunamis in Asia. But just trying to get a sense on your take of why now are we at this precipice moment?
I would say I can think of three or four reasons on why now, and that's an excellent question, Dave. And I agree with you. I think it's important to reflect on the importance of the timing and why now and what is going to drive the change. I think number one, on the E and ESG, focusing on climate, we are and we have reached a historical point in time where the Earth is heating up at a historical level. So in a way, we need to act now to avoid more and more climate disasters in the future. That's one. Second is the wealth gap is the widest we've ever seen. And actually, the E and the S are more connected than people think. There's a term called environmental justice, which is if you generally look at what are the areas that are the most polluted in this country, you realize that there's a direct correlation between that and the average wealth or socioeconomic status of that specific location, and that is unacceptable. And we also have reached a point where the wealth gap is extremely wide, and the main reason is most businesses in the last 100 years, or maybe since World War II, have been focused on optimizing for one thing, which is shareholder return, which is what I call the tip of the iceberg. But if you really look beneath the water, you see that there have been many, many other things that have not been included or integrated into that decision making. For example, if you're a business generating shareholder return but polluting a river, well, there's a cost to that. And that cost needs to be accounted for in today's world. And going back to your question, why now? I think we live in a world where, because of data and because of this amazing show that you're putting together, Dave, more and more people will start seeing the impact and having a more 360-degree view of the impact of a certain action. because of the rise of the millennials and Gen Z, who are now becoming a bigger part of the GDP and a bigger part of the population. They care a lot about this thing, and at the end of the day, it's going to be in this country, specifically in the United States, it's going to be the consumer behavior that will drive change. If you ask a Gen Z or a millennial whether, if adding, for example, tons of greenhouse gas emissions to your sweet green purchase will affect your behavior, well, it's starting to, because they care about it. And at the end of the day, businesses have to adapt to their customer needs. And I'm a deep believer that the shift will happen. Now, how fast will it happen? I think it's a big question mark in this country because of the lack of regulatory pressure. And I think it will be consumer sentiment and customer needs that will drive that change.
That's right. And I think we are having that critical shift in both mind share and the need for policy and adoption. And so this leads to, your creation, Patrick, of ESG Flow, and that being not only platform play, but ultimately also a data and AI play. So if you could share with the audience, you've described earlier on the show about the importance of non-financial data, and that some organizations may have upwards of, in their data catalog, somewhere north of 1,000 plus metrics. I can only imagine. I think back to my time building and scaling data products at Google, when on some data products I would have, let's say, a few hundred metrics. And that enormous corpus of data can take teams of people, of humans and software engineers and data scientists, to massage and manage many months of practice, because of the complexity and the alignment cross functionally with different orgs and business stakeholders and charters. So perhaps it sounds like you're building with your team a platform to solve some of these pain points, both from the human perspective, but also like the data infrastructure and AI. Would you mind unpacking a little bit more about that for today with ESG Flow?
Dave, as I mentioned earlier, we're focusing on a sector because by focusing on a sector, you suddenly focus on a subset of those metrics. And I would love to solve all 1,000 metrics and automate every single one of them. But the reality is, it's going to take me years, if not decades. And it's going to require like hundreds of millions of dollars for me to be able to do that. So focusing on a sector has allowed me to create a subset of metrics that are more relevant to my target market. So, as I said earlier, heavy industries, so discrete manufacturing, construction, and real estate is where I'm focusing 95% of my energy. And because of that, instead of 1,000 metrics, you now have 30 metrics that are more relevant. And those are your typical water waste, greenhouse gas emissions, your supplier data, health and safety data, understanding more, your supply chain and whistleblower policies. So it suddenly creates a subset that I can solve in the next 18 months. Then we're lucky because we live in a world where you can use AI from the ground up to extract that data and process it. So we're doing it one at a time. We already have done so much in the last 6 months. In today's world, I can tell you with very high confidence that we're the only software out there that can read through any utility, water, or waste invoice. And I know this seems like an easy problem to solve, but it hasn't been. I think it took us, the last 1 year and a half to be able to get to the point where we can confidently say, if in today's world I onboard a bank with 1,200 branches, or one of my customers is a real estate company with 3,500 sites globally in 117 countries, we were able to have 100% coverage of their greenhouse gas data, going back to all invoices, digitizing those. And we were recently passed an audit with one of the big auditors on our platform. So, in addition to having the customers on our platform, we also have the auditors on our platform. So the next thing we've cracked is being able to extract data from your suppliers specifically for purchased goods and services. So if you're a manufacturing company buying plastic, buying wood, buying steel, I can in real time get the data from your procurement system, match it to a specific weight, break it down to raw material, and find the right emission factor matched to each one of those. So much more to come. The next thing we're cracking is qualitative data extraction. So if you throw a whistleblower policy, an ethics policy, a hiring policy, anything, we can extract information that is relevant for your business. How have we done it? Again, it's using the power of AI. Let me get more specific in terms of what we have done. To be able to read through invoices, we've used a combination of OCRs and LLM. So over the last few months, we were able to create, what I call a keyword library, and be able to detect specific keywords from specific documents, regardless of how structured or unstructured they are, and then do real time matching of that data to the right emission factor using machine learning. Another example is using machine learning for the emission factor matching for scope 3 purchase goods and services, which is also something that we were able to do. In today's world, companies such as Wayfair are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on environmental consultants to do this process manually. Well, we can do it at 5% of the price, and we can do it in real time because of the power of machine learning. You don't no longer need a human to come in and look at that data and then try to find the right emission factor to match to that data. Everything happens in real time. And the reason I think this is important is this is such a nascent industry, and am a deep believer that every single person that understands the language that we're building of ESG, which is a language, in my opinion, should be spending their time driving change instead of worrying about the quality of the data and the speed of data extraction. There's many more ways where we use AI. Like one of them is anomaly flagging. In Japanese, the term is called pokayoke, which is being able to create an error proof process to make sure that you're getting total data, traceable data, true and trusted data. And we use AI to be able to catch anomalies and catch gaps and enrich those gaps and fix those anomalies all in real time. All of this is my short to medium term objective, which is getting you a data infrastructure. Now, the long term objective is to use AI for what I call decision science, which is being able to use that data to derive better insights and then drive decision making. In 10 years, I would hope for the CFO of a multi billion dollar manufacturing company to wake up, use our platform, and decide what suppliers to work with, what suppliers not to work with, how to change from steel to, for example, plexi, or to specific polymers that could replace that steel in your construction process or in your fabrication process. So all of that decision making will be done on our platform once all of the data is loaded in, and then you start identifying patterns. And I think this is where we truly unlock the power of this infrastructure in the medium to long term.
It sounds fantastic to see that you're truly building the flow or the end-to-end workflow for the ESG economy. And what I'm hearing, Patrick, is that there's similar to these, don't hate me for quoting McKinsey here, the famous data maturity curve, right? About these like 5 layers of organizations going from data non-mature to data mature, from data collection to analytics to chief data officer to insight ML and then predictive AI. It sounds like you have a similar framework that you've built, which is more of like a 3 layer approach. This layer one, this foundation layer of infrastructure, gathering data, pipelines, collection, cleaning, massaging the data, getting it to a good state. And you have that initial wedge as you've identified these 30 metrics, right? We're not going to start with 1,000. We're going to get to these 30 highly dense heavy metrics for specific industry carve outs. And then once they're ready, as you and your team have been building that for the last 18 months, you're now in this next stage or like layer two of this reporting, right? Where you're starting to showcase and provide this insight to the different organizations so that they could see, well, what is this holistic scorecard or overall view of how we're doing? And it sounds like that's been a lot of the work, layer one and layer two. And layer three, where you're moving towards, is around these recommendations, suggestions, so that organizations could be better ESG forward and ensure that they're aligning with policy, aligning with industry, and ultimately building for what's right for a better world. I'll pause there, see what's your take on that, thoughts that I'm sharing, or if you want to unlock more.
Yeah, Dave, I think you nailed it. I think that's exactly how I would summarize it. And I think maybe the only one thing that I would like to augment is, instead of ESG forward, I would say in a more integrated way. I think, in this country, ESG has gotten a lot of negative press and it's been a very heated topic. But if you take a step back, it doesn't matter what you call it. I think BlackRock just recently shifted the term from ESG to, I think it was responsible decision making. I'll have to check my facts, but I know that they just recently changed that term. I think if you take a step back, we should just think in a more integrated, holistic way. And that's exactly what layer three gets you in the next few years.
Sure, and I love the take that you shared about this like overall decision making. It's, as many listeners know in the show, we've been whether we call it humane forward or responsible or supportive of like doing the right thing with data first principles. It echoes similar, right, of like ESG first principles, ensuring that companies are leading the way, not being reactive, but being more proactive. And I think that's quite exciting and would resonate with our listeners. I think what's also so fascinating is that we're seeing so much change in the industry today around tech adoption to create these data intelligence layers that provide those recommendations. So I think you mentioned earlier on that you're bringing in a variety of data technologies and techniques with your team, but also with the rise of LLMs in the last 18 months. It sounds like that's been part of your tech stack to get the reporting up to speed and even on compliance. I'd love to hear more about how you and your team are thinking about tech strategy with the business strategy and building and scaling your product.
First of all, we've partnered with AWS since day one, and I think it's been one of the best partnerships that I decided to strike early on. We've been getting a lot of support from them, and we've been working very closely with them and their team to be able to build what we have built thus far. There's always this tension between short term versus long term, and as an early stage startup, you can't do it all. You have to stay focused, you have to keep your head down, you have to stay really like prioritize what is the most immediate and urgent need for your customers. I would say in a way 70-80% of our team stays focused on delivering what we have committed to our existing customers, and we've been very successful at that so far. I would say 20 to 30% of my team is focused on building this foundation for longer term success. And as we're automating 30 metrics. I think we've done like 6 or 7 so far, and we're slowly, covering the rest over the coming months. We're also lucky that we have amazing enterprises that we work with that are helping us build that IP and help us fine tune our ML models. And as part of that longer term strategy is building that keyword library, for example, and making sure that we're thinking a few metrics ahead. Like for example, one thing that we're solving right now is how do you get certain social metrics from recruiting interviews or from exit interviews or from performance reviews or from promotion policies within a company. How do you do it in a world where every single country is different? How do you create more another example is how do you standardize accident rate or health and safety rate from different countries, given that there is no single library or single dictionary that allows you to understand that. So this is where building that keyword library is going to be critical for us to continue to expand our data collection efforts. And as I said, we're fully built on AWS. We're cloud native, extremely modular, very scalable, very flexible. We're able to get data in from more than 230 ERP systems. We can read any type of document in any language, which is great as well. And yeah.
This is great. It's great to see how you're, building with cutting edge technology and that's helping you ship product faster and capture all the metadata, right, from these 30 metrics and all the keywords as you mentioned. Building out this index has been a key requirement for you to grow the business. And before we started today's show, you mentioned offline that you're, expanding and growing some partnerships in the business sector that you're focusing on with audit and insurance. Love to hear more about whether some of your growth plans and what that expansion looks like with partnerships.
Right now, we have many customers in Europe and in the United States. I would say it's probably like a 50-50 split right now. In Europe, we found product market fit with the companies ranging from like 400 million euros to 5 billion euros in annual revenue, and specifically focusing on, as I said, discrete manufacturing and construction and real estate companies. And there's massive demand right now because of the CSRD compliance framework. And we on our platform in today's world, which is amazing because the framework is only 6 months old, can already help you get fully compliant with that CSRD, which is a massive headache for most businesses in Europe. And we're taking that pain away, reducing that time, reducing that cost, helping customers get compliant faster, especially for the sectors that I mentioned. So our growth plans in Europe will be focused on that subset of companies, and we're just simply going direct. There's a massive pain point, and companies need a solution ASAP. There's massive urgency, and then we're quickly growing in that segment. In the United States, it's a partnership play. So we actually have partnered with three of the top five auditors and two more auditors to come in the next few months. As you know, these auditors have now expanded their role from financial auditing to non-financial auditing as well, specifically doing limited assurance or reasonable assurance on greenhouse gas data, or on water data, or on carbon credits, for example. And with the power of our tech, we can help companies get ready for an audit at a fraction of the price of how they would have done it if they were not using our technology. And then, even better, the auditors are on my platform, providing assurance to those customers, creating, again, more efficiencies for the auditors, and hence reducing the audit fees for the customers. Now, why is this a good thing for the auditors? There aren't enough experts out there that can provide greenhouse gas assurance. It's a new sector. You can't train and hire fast enough. So having the technology will allow you to do more with fewer people, while you end up hiring and training more people in the future. It creates higher customer satisfaction because customers, get a more seamless audit experience, get a higher customer retention because they are on our platform, and they are on both parties are on my platform, and therefore can you end up having an infrastructure built from the ground up with your external auditor given specific controls and privileges to your data, and then just makes the whole life of the auditors and the auditee a lot better. It increases the TAM for the auditor as well, because in today's world you're auditing greenhouse gas data, which, as I mentioned earlier, is one metric. Scopes 1 and 2 is two metrics technically, but then as you get into scope 3 you have 15 metrics, and then as you get into water and waste, biodiversity, social data, supplier data, which is another ball game. Like, we're only looking at, I would say, like 5% of the total market right now, and we have a chance to expand that together in the coming years. And I want our company ESG Flow to be at the forefront of that. So that's one of the exciting partnerships in the US. We're also, I can't disclose the name, but in conversations with two other software companies that are, like, on the leading edge of carbon accounting, and we're going to partner with them to be able to power their backend and make sure that the customers that are using their platforms can also get that source data, like accessibility and extraction, to be able to create a more seamless experience for the customer, but more importantly, real, like, reasonable assurance, and being able for their auditors to be able to view the source of that data all in one platform. So exciting things happening here. And obviously Bain is one of our investors, and we partner very closely with them and serve many of their clients. So in the US, it's a pure partnership play because it's a very nascent market, and we're technically creating the market of auditability in the ESG space. And therefore, partnerships is the most efficient way to grow in the coming years.
I think it's so commendable to see the pathway forward with partnerships. Though beyond that, I think something I wanted to double click on, Patrick, that you shared, which was about CSRD, and for the audience, that's the corporate sustainability reporting and disclosures, which for many years seemed to be kind of going back and forth in Congress and different elements around the world. But most recently, of course, we know early in 2024, the AI Act, right, got passed in the EU. We know that our friends at Tola Capital, who, back to in your previous round, talked about the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, right, which went into force back in January 2023. So, it begs the question. A lot of people may ask to what we shared earlier in the episode of why now? I mean, now is the right moment. Policies are moving forward, companies are moving forward. And whether you're small business, middle market, or the large industrials, right, who are the driving forces in economy. There's so much opportunity, and there is the need to make a switch right into all these data elements of ESG, like you mentioned, Patrick, carbon accounting, right? This is a newer area that's gaining traction. So I just wanted to check in there with our audience and with yourself, like what call to action on everything we're talking about here today, and that you'd like to share, so to see what's next.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that addition, Dave. I totally agree with you. I think in Europe, regulations, I think I was reading this yesterday. I think there's more than 500 laws in Europe, and that companies will, not all of them are passed. I think around 40 are passed, but just imagine the complexity in countries like China, Singapore, Canada, Australia, Brazil. are Saudi Arabia are quickly following the path. Like, I know for a fact that all of them are releasing their regulations in the next 6 to 9 months if they haven't already in the last few months. So call to action. If there's one thing I'd like you all to leave with today is, I guess, maybe two ideas. One is a call to action, and one is just a sign of hope. Like, call to action, just start. Start somewhere. It's going to be a massive journey. It's going to be an extremely value additive journey for your business. It's hard to see the entire set of rewards you're going to get from doing this, but you will see it one day, and it's going to become clearer and clearer to you in the next few months. So just start somewhere, regardless of what type of business you are in or what type of sector you are in. Having that data is power. Data is the new oil in a way, no pun intended. But you need to start somewhere to be able to reap the benefits of that data. And start somewhere, whether it's getting energy intensity data on your sites, or supplier data, or understanding employee data, and just decide where you want, set your strategy, do some sort of materiality assessment. In Europe, it's called double materiality assessment, which is extremely relevant for your strategy. The earlier you do it, the better position for success you are in the coming few years and decades. And then just start collecting data. Start with any metric, anywhere, and don't be afraid of the journey that lies ahead. We're very lucky to live in the world we live in today, where you can use the power of AI to create the speed and efficiency of this. If there's like one sign of hope, I call myself an irrational optimist, and I'm a deep believer in the power of humanity. And I think, Dave, that's one of the many reasons you started your podcast. And again, very honored to be here. But if I were to say, like, one sign of hope is, we are seeing change. It's happening as we speak. It will continue happening and at a higher velocity, given the power of AI. Yeah, that's pretty much it, Dave. Extremely grateful for this conversation. Hopefully, in today's conversation, I was able to impact the life of one person at least out there, and excited to keep the conversation going with you.
It's great to hear all the knowledge that you imparted and the validity that the market has hit this inflection point where it's no longer a second thought to think about responsible and sustainable innovation with ESG and data metrics, but now is the time. And so, for our listeners, if you want to learn more, you can go to esgflow.com, which is esgflo.com. You can book a demo with Patrick and his team to learn more about the product offerings, whether you're small, middle market, or large. They'd be glad to partner with you and get you on your journey to supporting and growing your business, right? In the future of how we're shaping the world, right? It's an exciting time, and just because we have changes in political climates and real climates and social climates, we have to continue to keep doing the good work. And so, Patrick, it's such an honor to have you on the show. For our listeners, Patrick Obeid, the CEO and co-founder of ESG Flow. Thanks for joining us on HumAIn.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the HumAIn podcast. Did the episode measure up to your thoughts on ML and AI, data science, developer tools, and technical education? Share your thoughts with me at humainpodcast.com/contact. Remember to share this episode with a friend, subscribe and leave a review, and listen for more episodes of HumAIn.